The planet Mercury is still shrinking, a new study finds. Planetary scientist David Rothery outlines new research into the continued shrinking of the closest planet to our Sun. Planetary scientists have long known that Mercury has been shrinking for billions of years. Despite being the closest planet to the Sun, its interior has been cooling down as internal heat leaks away. This means that the rock, and within that the metal, of which it is composed, must have contracted slightly in volume. It's unknown, however, to what extent the planet is still shrinking today, and if so, for how long that is likely to continue. On our new paper published in Natural Geoscience offers fresh insight. Because Mercury's interior is shrinking, its surface and crust has progressively less area to cover. It corresponds to this by developing thrust faults, where one tract of terrain gets pushed over the adjacent terrain. This is like the wrinkles that form on apples as it ages, except that an apple shrinks because it's drying out, whereas Mercury shrinks because of thermal contraction of the interior. The first evidence of Mercury shrinkage came in 1974, when the Mariner 10 mission transmitted pictures of kilometers-high scraps, ramp-like slopes, snaking their way for hundreds of kilometers across the terrain. Messenger, which orbited Mercury 2011 to 2015, showed many more lobate scarps, as they had become known, in all parts of the globe. For such observations, it was possible to deduce that gently dipping geological faults, known as thrusts, approach the surface below each scarp and are a response to Mercury having shrunk in radius by a total of about 7 kilometers. But when did this happen? The accepted way to work out the age of Mercury's surface was to count the density of impact craters. The older the surface, the more craters. But this method is tricky because the rate of impacts that produced craters was much greater in the deep past. However, it was always clear that Mercury scarps must be fairly ancient because, although they cut through some older craters, while a few younger craters are superimposed upon the scarps, and so the scarps must be older than those. When did the scarps last move? The consequence view is that Mercury scarps are mostly about 3 billion years old, but are all of them that old? And did the older ones cease moving long ago, or are they still active today? We should not expect that the thrust fault below each scarp has moved only once. The biggest earthquake on Earth in recent years, the magnitude 9 Tohoku earthquake offshore of Japan, Fukushima in 2011, which caused a Fukushima disaster, was the result of a sudden jump by 20 meters long along the 100-kilometer length of the responsible thrust fault. Mercury's biggest earthquakes are probably smaller. To accumulate the 2 to 3 kilometer total shortening that can be measured across the typical scarp on Mercury would take hundreds of magnitude 9 earthquakes, or more likely millions of smaller events, which could have spread out all over billions of years. Getting a hand on the scale and duration of the faults, movements in Mercury is important because we would not expect Mercury thermal contraction to have entirely finished, even though this should be slowing down. Cracking up. Until now, evidence has been sparse, but our team found ambiguous signs that many scarps have continued to move in geological recent times, even if they were initiated billions of years ago. This work was triggered when PhD student at Open University in UK, Ben Mann, noticed that some scarps have small fractures piggybacking on their stretched upper surface. He interpreted these grabens, the geological word to describe a strip of ground dropping down between the two parallel faults. This typically happens when the crust is stretched. Stretching may seem surprising on Mercury, where overall the crust is being compressed, but Mann realized that these grabens would occur if a thrust slice of crust has been bent as it pushed over the adjacent terrain. If you try to bend a piece of toast, it may crack in a similar way. The grabens are less than 1 kilometer wide and less than 100 meters deep. Such comparatively small features must be much younger than the ancient structure in which they sit. Otherwise, they would have already been erased from view by impacts tossing materials across the surface by a process aptly named impact gardening. Based on the rate of blurring resulting from impact gardening, we calculate that the majority of grabens are less than about 300 million years old. This suggests that the latest movement must have happened equally recently. Working with the most detailed images provided by Messenger, man found 48 large lobate scarps that definitely have small grabens. A further 244 were topped by probable grabens, which are not seen quite clearly enough to the best Messenger images. These are now prime targets for confirmation by the imaging system of the joint European-Japanese BepiColombo mission, which would start operating in orbit around Mercury in early 2026. Lessons from the moon. The moon has also cooled and contracted. Its lobate scarps are considerably smaller and less spectacular than those on Mercury, but on the moon we know for sure that, as well as being geographically recent, some are active today. This is because recent reanalysis of the locations of moonquakes recorded by seismometers, vibration detectors, left on the moon's surface by Apollo missions, shows that moonquakes are clustered close to lobate scarps. Also, the most detailed images of the moon's surface from orbit reveal that the tracks made by boulders bouncing down scarp faces, presumably after being dislodged by moonquakes, much smaller in scale than Mercury's grabens. Similar logic applies to those boulders tracks, and they would become erased from visibility after only a few million years, so they must be young. BepiColombo won't be landing, so we have no prospect of collecting any seismic data on Mercury. However, as well as showing small grabens more clearly, its most detailed images might reveal boulder tracks that could be additional evidence of recent quakes. I'm looking forward to find out. This is by David Rothery, Professor of Planetary Geosciences, The Open University, UK. This article was republished from the Conversation under Creative Commons, and this is on Unexplained Mysteries by T.K. Randall. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.